If you're thinking of starting a machine shop or you already have one of your own, it's easy and fun to think about how successful it's going to be and all the awesome things you're going to do with it. Very few of us start out planning to fail. However, we have talked about why machine shops fail, but what are some things that are consistent in shops that succeed in the long term? What's up, guys? Ian Sandusky from Lakewood Machine Tool, back here again for Practical Machinist. And on this episode of Machine Shop Talk, we're going to be diving into the forums to cover a thread I found very, very interesting. But before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Let's get into it. Okay guys, so as promised today, we are going to be talking a little bit about why machine shops succeed and what success might look like. So to cover the thread that was kind of the inspiration for this on the Practical Machinist forums, which we'll link below here, there was a thread simply called Success or Failure as a Machine Shop. The original poster was talking about how in the almost 30 years the Practical Machinist has had the forums, there have been a lot of threads started by people who either are starting a machine shop, looking to start a machine shop, or they're talking about how their machine shop is running. Some have done well, and they kind of remarked that over the years that had kind of parsed out from the beginnings. You know, obviously a lot of people start here and only so many are going to succeed in the long term, but they wanted to know why some of these shops had succeeded and what that journey looked like. This thread was extremely interesting to me because when you went through and read it, and I highly recommend you do read it yourself as well, when you went through, there are a lot of common themes between at least these people who are responding and their journey as a machine shop, you know, that most of these are kind of talking about multiples of years or decades they've been in business. The first thing that was fairly consistent between all of them was that they all reported that money was extremely tight during the first few years when they started up. This is not surprising, but I mean, it kind of always hurts a little to hear because obviously this is a struggle. Some said they basically made zero income for multiple years while their machine shop started, and everything was going towards, you know, paying to keep the lights on, paying for their space, paying for their machinery, paying for their whatnots. A lot of them credited having a very supportive spouse during this period who also brought in income to the household. It was repeated several times there. And this is understandable. When I look at, you know, when my old man started Lakewood, he had 5 partners when he started here, and he was the last one that didn't give up. But he always tells this story to me about when he would go to the accountant. I think the first year he was by himself, and he reported to do his taxes a 3-figure or 4-figure. I can't remember if it was in the hundreds or a couple of $1,000s in income at the end of the year. And his accountant said to him, "Peter, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Go get a job. You could make 10 times this amount easily, you know, flipping burgers." But he didn't want that. He held on, and obviously things turned out okay. At the beginning, you really do have to reinvest a lot of your profits or even, you know, your revenue back into the shop. You know, if you have machine payments, those got to get paid whether you have work coming in or not. Tooling, you know, tooling's expensive when you're getting started. You have to buy everything. You know, people don't think when you buy a machine, great, now you got to buy vices, you got to buy end mills, you got to buy holders, you got to buy an indicator, you got to buy, you know, QA equipment. There's a lot that goes into that. So those first couple of years, you may be making nothing, but that was consistent across what was reported there. The second thing that shops who survived and became successful all kind of reported is something we talked about recently here. I think it was probably on the blast or maybe 2 episodes ago. And that's the original goal work that they started out looking for didn't really end up being the work that made them money long term. You know, we talk about how these shops like to go out and find a specific kind of work. I want to make X parts for Y industry. But many did find that. So, you know, they wanted to make flywheels for cars. So they went out and started making flywheels for cars. Yeah, they sold some. But the things that turned into the real opportunities typically aren't those little things that they started out trying to do. And sometimes they're big things. You know, I'm going to make parts for giant machinery. I'm going to focus on making these. But what I'm saying is that It wasn't that part. It was the opportunities that came up while they were in that industry that ended up making them money. So essentially they started to fill a niche, and then in filling that niche, they went, oh, there's this other niche right here that's not being served. But they didn't really have visibility on that problem that needed solving until they started working in that industry. Very, very interesting. For example, one person there was talking about how they started a shop basically trying to be a repair shop. So they got a manual mill, manual lathe, tried to make themselves as broad as possible as they started. But then, 10, 15 years later, they said something like 60% of their revenue comes from spray welding. And the rest, the other 40%, is doing CNC machining for some very specific automotive electronics. I don't even know what they are. I'm not really a car guy. But the point is, they went out and said, I'm going to fix everything for everybody. But then as they kept going, hey, there's a need in this area for spray welding. Great, I'm going to do spray welding. Hey, nobody's doing these kind of electronics components. Great, that's for me. And now that's their core business. So by being available and being there when the need arose, they were there to fill the need and made a successful business out of it. That flexibility allowed them to grow while others did not. Lastly, there was a user on the Practical Machinist forums called Digital Factory. And they had a very interesting framework they put up about how shops start and the kind of phases they go through. So I thought I'd share it with you here. Thank you very much for Digital Factory for sharing this, full credit to them. Phase 1 that they listed was bootstrap, bust your hump and make not much money. This is kind of what we talked at the beginning. This is what we imagine when a shop is starting out. I always think about when you start a shop, it's like driving a big flywheel. It's heavy. It takes a lot of work and a lot of momentum to get that spinning. And when we're talking about spinning, that's good, consistent work coming in the door, good, consistent work going out of the door. Once you get that going, it can sustain itself a little bit. But during that initial phase, you're going to be putting all your weight into getting that thing turning. Phase 2 that they listed was growth. They said, take on every job and reinvest every penny back into the business. I agree with this with some caveats. Obviously, one, maybe not every job. We talked about it before that every job is not a good job for every shop, and you want to avoid that. But I understand what they're saying. The second caveat to that is this phase can last a long time, way longer than people may think. They think, all right, yeah, I'm going to get going. I'm going to get, my flywheel going, and then I'm going to be ready to go. It's not usually the way this goes. It takes a lot longer to get that consistency going, get things going, and get comfortable kind of in the role that you want to be. The other thing is that a lot of people look at this growth phase, when you're buying new machines, you're getting everything set up, getting my staff, as kind of a one and done. And I would argue that you could find yourself in this position more times than you think. We talked recently about niches. Well, let's say that you're chasing this one niche and you're doing really well. Markets change, whatever it may be. Now you see another niche that you're going to move into. Well, you may need to grow and reinvest a lot of profits back into the shop during that time to be able to serve that new niche. Maybe you need different equipment. Maybe you need different QA stuff. Maybe you need to get a certification that's going to eat a ton of time and a ton of money. You have to understand and be willing to go back into this growth phase multiple times over the years. The final phase that they listed was phase 3. They said steady state, get lean, shed dead weight, jobs, products, equipment, personnel, unused space. Focus on the stuff that makes money, cull or raise prices on the stuff that doesn't. If phase 2 we called growth, if I call it growth, this is what I would call mastery. This is where you find shops that have their own product lines or a very, very established niche, and they've spent a lot of time and money getting very, very good at doing it. In job shops or contract manufacturing, this is where you can be a lot more selective with the kind of work that you take on because you're good at it and you're so good at it that it's hard to compete with. If you are a product line, this is where you're not just making stuff anymore, you are owning that segment. And everybody kind of wants to get here. Very few do get there. A lot of people are stuck in the growth phase forever or have to keep getting bumped back into the growth phase due to things in or outside of their control. But I thought that was an interesting roadmap for how successful shops end up kind of getting there. In any case, guys, I'd like to know in the comments below, what are some things that you think make a successful shop? What have you seen? What has your journey been? Did you end up doing the same kind of work at the end that you thought you would at the beginning? Let us know. This is how we grow. This is how we share. We're all trying to help each other. Very few of us are even in a position to compete with one another geographically or, based on capabilities. This is where we grow and learn as an industry. So if you can share your thoughts below, it's going to help everybody. And as always, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. You take care.